Among the roleplay communities of Laurelin, there is one site known and cherished by all as a hub for content and stories, the very essence which drives the roleplay scene. Laurelin Archives. A site that has been around for well over a decade, the Laurelin Archives is a place where roleplayers from all corners of the server write stories about their characters. If you look past the archetypal self-insert monologues and some questionable AI-generated images, you will find a highly passionate community dedicated to writing and creating. You will find short stories, poetry, entire articles dedicated to written characters. Some even post their own fan art. It's a creative outlet seldom seen elsewhere on the server, and for that alone, it deserves recognition. While the quality varies, over the years there's been enough content to fill out a Bible. Make no mistake, Laurelin's roleplay scene is passionate, and it's that passion for Lord of the Rings and the accessibility of writing in this format that the community still exists in some form to this day, 17 years after the game's inception, and in a time where this hobby is becoming somewhat of a niche. Now, whether or not the works have a wider appeal outside of Laurelin, I don't know. Outside the roleplay scene, few will ever know or really care what goes on within, and I don't interact as much as I used to either. But rarely, when the planets align, there comes a character who is able to generate enough community hype that they become recognized for their writing, the catalyst of truly great moments. This is the story of Nick Tallow. Nick Tallow, or his true title, self-proclaimed Lord Nicthalion Tallow, is an enigmatic contradiction, and that is by design. His bio is written in a fairly typical, if not direct sort of way. He describes a character's general appearance and clothing, along with noting a few of his tastes and dislikes. Curiously, the writer puts emphasis on the fact that despite the lofty way Nick portrays himself, he is in reality rather unremarkable. He's a little overweight, his hair is thinning, and his clothes, while fine, lacks any real style. But perhaps more telling is his occupation, which bluntly states, professional vagrant. On Laurelin Archives, there are two separate panels for each character description. One is for outward appearances, and the other is for their character background. As the in-game bio feature has limited space, a lot of writers will put a link to their more detailed profile page. Some writers tend to fall into the trap of writing too much about their backstory, and often vomit their self-made backstory at any opportunity they get, whilst others may be so established through years of writing that such details are formed through role-playing itself, and it becomes impossible to get down every detail without writing an essay. But Nick decides to break the mold. All he writes here is, best to hear it from the man, the legend, himself. Keen-eyed readers might already recognize the gimmick of this character, but if you haven't figured it out by now, he's basically Walter Mitty in Middle-earth. Is that a spoiler? Maybe. If you're just watching this video to catch up on what the hype is about, well, now you know. But don't be misled into thinking Tallow is just another elaborate shitpost. The quality of his writing is among the finest you'll find in the community at this time, and due to the originality of his works, it has already garnered a sort of cult following. And hopefully I can share some of the joy I've had from reading his stories with you. But who is this legend? What fantastical tales does he spin? And what is the attraction? Sit back, relax, crack open a troll stout, and let me introduce you into the cult of Tallow. Beginning on August the 20th, 2023, Nick posts his first adventure to the Laurelin Archives, titled Forward from the author's own esteemed hand. Here he boasts his involvement in the War of the Ring. But hold on, dear viewer, you may have watched the movies and maybe you're one of those super mega nerds who've read the books, but this is the true and secret tale of how it all went down. A tale so strange and tragic and incredible that it was lost to history itself. Now, at this point, I had to zoom in very far into the page because for some reason, the smaller fonts are really small on my desktop. I'm not so sure it's a stylistic choice because I've seen other completely unrelated stories use obnoxiously small fonts like this. I'm just going to chalk this one up to the website itself. Our story begins as an introduction from Gilmith. He seems to be a Gondorian scribe whose job it is to write down all the accounts relating to the War of the Ring. Now Middle-earth is moving into the Fourth Age, it's a pretty good time to preserve that history for the future. This is relevant because now we know that the smaller text, the footnotes, is written by the scribe, Gilmith, and not in fact Nick Tallow himself. So the scribe's copying written articles for preservation and begins with Peregrine Took. He's the hobbit that went to Gondor, just so that we're clear. And it's exactly in this passage, where Pippin is reminiscing and noting that back home no one really knows or understands what they went through, that our hero, Lord Nicthalion, is first mentioned. All those strange stories flying about Sharky. Little Primsy Bolger once had the cheek to tell me that he was half-orc, you know, and that he fought Frodo to the death. Tell me, indeed, about that cad, Lord Tallow, and the ludicrous claims I've heard of him, about Strider being an elven changeling, all sorts of nonsense. Turns out that Lord Tallow isn't exactly known by anyone important, or anyone at all. This comes across as irregular to the scribe. Tallow is mentioned in no other works he can find, so the scribe makes it his business to find out who this lord is. Surely he's someone important, lost to the annals of history, right? Surely he deserves apt recognition. So, in the name of accurate journalism, our scribe journeys across the land, nearly 5 years in total, searching for any further information. Makes you grateful for the internet these days, I suppose. Eventually, the scribe reaches the borders of the Shire, where he finds the book. And it's a copy of this book that we're reading from. Turns out the scribe is not impressed, so much so that he writes a special copy with his own special footnotes. It's the Middle-earth equivalent of a teacher marking your low-effort essay, or a React video on YouTube, take your pick. But oh boy, does our scribe bring the fire, in a style only really found here on Laurelin. I cannot recommend this book, yet I believe it to be important nonetheless. For contained within these illiterate lies is a stark reminder, for I, and for many in this fair city, a reminder that the knowledge we hold so precious and dear is a luxury granted to us that many have not. So now we have the foundation of this character. The story of Nick Tallow is a self-aware play on a lofty, sensationalized, and outright untrue account of a character who in reality is just some nobody. In each chapter, the scribe adds his own takes on the wild stories that Nicthalion writes. So there you have it, that's the gimmick of Lord Tallow. On the 26th of February 2024, Nicthalion hosts an in-game roleplay event, where he shows up outside the Combe and Wattle Inn. This was not meant to be that deep. People could interact with Lord Tallow, heckle him, be his adoring fan, or just interact amongst themselves casually. The event was treated as entirely in character. This is generally the difference between regular text-based roleplay and what some in the community dub RP Lite, which is more akin to the common music bands and social meetups you'll find elsewhere. But as an open event, where anyone is welcome, you'll find a range of roleplayers, from the ones who take writing characters more seriously, to the more casual types, who treat it more as a out-of-character social gathering. The real beauty in this particular event is that both were valid in the context given, and because the writer himself is in fact a more serious roleplayer with other characters, he was able to appeal to the two demographics very well. After some meet and greet, Tallow takes a stage on a table and joyfully recounts one of his tales. It is up to the players to decide whether or not his story is true. Okay, this is just a quick off-script warning to let you know that the following rendition of the Nick Tallow story was one take and unedited, and it's really shit. So if you're just watching a video to catch up on who Nick Tallow was, go away now. This part is just for the shit posters. Of Imrahil and the Green Dragon. Once upon a time years ago, I was sitting about in my castle, considering a great and difficult things and hoping that the wicked high steward Denethor would not inevitably betray the fair land of Gondor to Mordor, when there was a knock at my door. "Enter," I cried brilliantly. The door opened, and who do you think was there? Why, it was none other than my old friend and good friend, Mr. Prince Imrahil of Dol Amroth and Gondor. He was a pleasant sort of chap, with a great bushy beard and a rolling laugh. But today he was not laughing, though he still had his beard. Nay, there was a wrath in his eyes, and sorrow in his step, and tears in his eyes, and also his beard. "Why, good Imrahil," I declaimed, "whatever is the matter, my old friend?" With a great fear and terrible tragicosity, Imrahil answered my question with the words of our reply. A dragon," Imrahil said. "But last week, dreadful, frightful, mighty, beastish dragon, with swords for claws and knives for teeth." But Imrahil spoke figuratively, as he and I both understood. It was actually quite a normal dragon, with normal claws and teeth, just horrid and massive and sharp, like the knives or swords, but not really. So anyway, Imrahil said, last week this dragon popped up next to Dol Amroth, which is where I live, and I'm prince of, and one day I will be king when my father dies. Yes, I know, I declared. Dol Amroth is a place somewhere in Gondor, and the king of Dol Amroth is a great friend of the kings of Rohan and Gondor, who are also my friends. It is a very big city, and they love swans and boats there. And the people of that place are mighty and tall, nearly as tall even as I. Oh no, I cried. That's terrible news. About the dragon, that is. Not about you being prince. If I can aid you in slaying this wretched worm, dearest of friends and best of chaps, I will gladly do so. Excellent, let's be off then, said Prince Imrahil. So off we went, riding through the lands of Gondor, but first walking through my massive castle, richly decorated and magnificently filled with treasure and jewels and nicely made chairs, to get out of the gate into the lands of Gondor. Then we were in the lands of Gondor. Green and wide they were, with hills all about, and trees on top of those hills. And also between those hills, and also where there were no hills at all. As we rode, we espied many great and beautiful sights, like rivers and stags and things like that. Truly the land of Gondor, which is my home, is the fairest of all the lands of Gondor. When we got to Belfalas, which is where Dol Amroth is, and that land was also fair, but it was not so fair this day, for it was black, and burning, and on fire, and so everywhere we rode were skeletons and dead people who had been chewed up. Alas for the fair land of Dol Amroth, I wept, as I rode and sang a lament for that land, and its terrible problem with this pesky dragon. Where once was a wagon, now feasts a big dragon, whose fiery breath hath brought lots of death. From head to mighty tail, his sight doth make people wail, and when he comes to the feast, then hide away your beast. But this worm shall we slay, aye, we shall slay him today, and when dead lies the dragon, then we shall toast our flagons. And all the people cheered and wept as they heard my song, and they cheered for they were truly glad I was here to help kill the nuisance. And they wept because they were glad too. It was a happy sort of weeping, but also they wept because they were sad that the dragon had eaten their fathers and wives and so on. But mostly were they glad, for I am famed in those lands, famed for being well known. Then we got to Dol Amroth, and behold, there the dragon too also was, and he saw me, and roared spitefully, and ran away by flying away into the sky. But before he flew away, he snatched up a maiden in his very jaws, to feast upon later. What vileness is this? I questioned. Pray, Prince Imrahil, who was that fair maiden? Do you know her? And Imrahil wept sore tears and said, Lord Tallow, thou must now learn a terrible truth, for she is my betrothed. Lilac is his name, and truly she is the fairest of all fair maidens I did ever set my eyes upon. And I gasped in shock. Well, we must rescue her then, of course, I said. I did not know you were betrothed, Prince Imrahil. Aye, it be recent news, explained Prince Imrahil. And a strange tale indeed, which I was going to tell you soon, for naturally you will be invited to the wedding feast. But I haven't seen you for a while, which is why I didn't tell you. Of course, this makes perfect sense to me, I replied. My sincerest congratulations, old chum. Thanks, re-answered Imrahil. Anyway, I was out riding and hunting last week, and I killed a deer and 3 boar. Also, our good friend Boromir was here, but he has gone off to war again, so he can't help us with the dragon. A great pity, I intoned. Boromir is a great warrior and a mighty man, being the son of the nasty High Steward Denethor and the captain of the army of Gondor. He is indeed a fine sort of chap. Yes, affirmed Imrahil. Anyway, we were off hunting, and what do you think we saw? A maiden with flowing hair and heaving a bosom. And she was asleep in a patch of lilacs, which is how she earned her name, because she woke up and we said, What is your name, fair maiden? And she said, I do not know. So we brought her back to Dol Amroth and named her Lilac, and then we fell in love. Her and I, that is, not Boromir. Then I said, O Lilac, sweetest of all the flowers in the field and the fairest of all maidens in Dol Amroth, I love you dearly. Will you marry me? And then she said, Yes, of course, Prince Imrahil. And that is the happy tale of how we became to be betrothed. Truly, I am glad for you, my old friend, I said gladly. Now, come on, let's get that awful old dragon, and rescue Miss Lilac, or should I say, Mrs. Imrahil. And we laughed merrily as we rode down to the dragon's lair. The dragon had made his lair in a place called Ethelond, which was quite near Dol Amroth. So we rode up there, drawing our swords and shouting challenge of war to the dragon, and waving our swords about. And as we rode, we drew ever nearer to the dragon, nearer and nearer, aye. And with every step we were closer to it, and not further away, until suddenly we were there, where the dragon was. It was a massive dragon, one of the biggest I've ever seen, and it was as big as a huge tavern, or a fairly small mountain, and smoke and fire poured out of his nostrils and onto the grass. At the moment it was hiding behind a mountain, but we could see it, because the mountain was quite small, and we said, "Huzzah, and have at thee, O dragon!" First it breathed a river of fire, but we jumped into the sea, and a sea of water is much bigger than a river of fire. Then it tried to eat Prince Imrahil all up, but he had big spikes all over his spiky armor, and then he had to spit him out again. And while it tried to eat Prince Imrahil, I chopped at its neck and claws and tail and other bits, and wounded it terribly, but I did not kill it, even though I chopped it very well and heroically. For there is only one way to kill a dragon, but luckily I knew what that way was, since otherwise maybe I could not have killed it. "Hey, over there! Anfarstator the Green!" I cried, which was the dragon's name. Anfarstator the Green looked over here, which was there, which was where I was. "Ah, Lord Tallow, we meet at last," it growled in a dragon's voice. "Much have I learnt of thee, and all thy brilliance and noble honesty. But now Vouse's brilliance is at an end." And, my dear audience, the big dragon turned around and knocked Prince Imrahil over, and he fell on the ground and said, "Ouch!" And then Anfarstator the Green pounced on me and swallowed me right up. "No," said Prince Imrahil when he saw me get swallowed right up. So there I was, and Nicthalion begins coughing loudly and painfully, having apparently exhausted his voice. He reaches for his flagon of wine and takes a great gasping gulp of it, but the wine only seems to exacerbate his discomfort, and for a moment all he can do is wheeze and wave his hands about wildly, breathing and drinking in ill-advised turn. Eventually, though, the fit passes, and Tallow straightens himself up and continues. "Nay, Prince Imrahil, she is your sister. You cannot—" "Ah, hells, I haven't got to that bit yet. Right. Where was I? Right, she's swallowed up by a dragon. So, luckily, I knew that the only weak spot of a dragon is his belly. It is a secret known only to the wise, of course, but luckily I am quite wise. So when I shouted, 'Hey, over here!' what I really was doing was tricking that dragon into putting me into its belly. So then it was so, as it was suchly so, that I was gobbled right up into the dragon's belly, and suddenly I used my sword and stabbed the wicked worm right to death. Alas, that I, a foolish and wicked worm, thought to challenge the skill and cleverness and mighty arm and sharp sword of Lord Tallow. Truly, I have only myself to blame for my life ill spent and my untimely end at the hands of this mightiest and greatest of men I ever did meet. And let me tell you, I met quite a few. And then he died, and that was that. So then it was as so that I did crawl out from the dragon, and stood there all covered in blood and gore and bits of dragon, and I said, 'The dragon is dead,' and everyone cheered. 'Prince Imrahil,' I said, 'where is Lilac?' 'Oh, right,' cried Prince Imrahil. 'I forgot about that. Why, where indeed is she indeed?' And then we looked into the dragon's lair, and there she was. She was indeed a very fair maiden, with long hair, and she was not too thin. Also she saw us, and she said, 'Prince Imrahil, my love,' and he said, 'Lilac, my love,' and then they embraced and kissed wildly and passionately. And I was glad, yet also I was not, for on seeing the face of Lilac and hearing her voice, a strange memory and thought did come to my mind, and I thought that maybe there was something wrong with this happy tale. And I said, 'Prince Imrahil, are you sure you never met this lady in your life?' And he said, 'Yes, I am sure, but I did not meet her, so no.' So I said, 'By the way, Prince Imrahil, do you remember when you were just a baby, and some elves came by and they visited Dol Amroth for a bit, and while they were there they kidnapped your twin sister, and ran away with her, and all the land wept at the treachery of those elves, and the loss of your sister, Imrahil, that's right.' And Prince Imrahil said, 'Aye, I remember it well. Now, I am counted wise in matters of wizardry and wisdom, and have studied many things that are strange, and I happen to know a few spells. And I held up my hand, and I said a magic word, though I should not say it now in case some magic accidentally happens. And lo, the magic word worked, and suddenly Lilac remembered everything she had forgotten, because I removed the wicked spell placed upon her. 'So it is so,' said I. 'The dragon, even in death, has one final vengeance to enact, my friend, and so it is, thus, that this woman is your sister.' And then did Imrahil and what did I say? Imrahil, that's right. Imrahil and Imrahil did then weep bitter tears of bitterness, and Prince Imrahil said, 'But Lord Tallow, we are in love.' 'Imrahil,' I said very sternly, 'you cannot marry your sister. It is wrong.' 'But I want to,' said Imrahil. 'And she's not really my sister, is she? I haven't seen her for years and years, after all.' It is wrong, I said. It is not for you or I to question why it is wrong. It just is, for some reason. Well, I believe you, Lord Tallow, because truly you are the wisest and best person I've ever met, said Imrahil. But I could tell that he was still upset. Truly did I feel sorrow for him, for it was an unhappy chance, and also quite unlucky because he did not know at the time, and to be fair she was very pretty. But anyway, Imrahil wept sadly and said, Alas for this cruel fate, O Lord Tallow, for true is our love, and also we didn't know, but now I feel my heart sore within me, and am most vexed, for I know I shall never love again. Farewell, sweet world, and dear brother, and also Lord Tallow. And then she cast herself from the cliff and into the sea, and ever after was that place known as Imrahil's Fall. But as we watched, a strange thing happened, for a great white bird rose from the sea where Imrahil had fallen, a bird like a seagull or something, and it rose high into the air, and thus did we know that Imrahil was at last at peace. And this, my dear friends, is the terrible, tragic, and true tale of the tragedy of Prince Imrahil and Princess Imrahil and the great green dragon. Now, and Lord Tallow pauses, expectant, waiting, suggestive. Would anyone like to buy me a drink, maybe?